Word nerd, wordsmith, wordy, wordless. Oxford Dictionary says a word is a single, distinct, meaningful element of speech or writing, used with others or sometimes alone. We say each one matters. No extra words is literature, minimalist style. And we're getting you right to the story.
Walk a pavement once. I don't have time to do things twice. I looked in the mirror. So too did my much younger partner. It was plain to her, to everyone, I'd overdosed on repetition. It was time to go cold turkey. It was time to go to Brighton. When you live like me in inland and inclement Scotland, Brighton appears to be a dazzling jewel. And it was. It was everything I'd read and heard about. Indeed, it was more, because I and Susie added another ingredient, something absent from the guidebook, something absent from all guidebooks. Do it once. I rented out our home, sold a car, and we arrived at Brighton railway station one midsummer's evening. The adventure was ours, but the inspiration came from our good friend Jack Treacle. Not that we could emulate Jack. While always operating within the bounds of legality, he takes his fight against repetition to limits we would only fantasise about. If he's a PhD at this sort of thing, we're just playing with crayons in primary one. But at least we went to nursery school, and soon we were using our joined-up writing skills to sign a 6-month lease on a small but delightful flat on the cusp of Hove and only minutes from the beach. Do everything once. Pubs, clubs, cafes, museums, festivals, churches, hotels, theatres, parades, gardens, cinemas, fairgrounds, parks, leisure centres, talks, extreme sports, dog tracks and race tracks, day trips and boat trips, the sights, the sounds, the barbers, the bakers, and the candlestick makers. That, anyhow, was the general idea, but it had to be modified. After all, how could I safely go bungee jumping when my blood pressure is 150 over 110? Or skateboard along Marine Parade when I've acute arthritis in the left knee? The result was a once-only list that reflected our differing interests, health profiles and energy levels. I called it Bespoke in Brighton. Predictably, it included the city's tourist attractions, but it was dominated by activities and places that appeal to our tastes and idiosyncrasies. Belly dancing, the home delivery service from La Cucina, innumerable restaurants, Zen meditation, thunder football, Hotel Divan, the Duke of York Cinema, Gay Pride, Valentino's Cocktail Bar, et al. Et al. Was a tad long, and as we made our way down the list, we encountered a problem facing everyone. Time was fast running out. My feet aren't as nimble as they used to be, but my mind is, and no sooner than you can say, do nothing twice, the solution came to me. Stay for another 6 months. Our tenant in Scotland was happy to renew her contract. Susie was delighted. I was over the moon. For me, to constantly seek the new and eschew repetition was like emerging from decades in a chrysalis. Everything had freshness, vitality and vibrancy. I hadn't known anything like it since childhood. I hadn't been as happy in years. Happiness also came from accepting that I could no longer snowboard down K2, and hence knowing that when in Brighton I needed a Zimmer zone. So that from the moment we moved into the flat, we decided that in its immediate environs we could drink, internet cafe and shop as often as we wished. We could relax and I could recharge my batteries. It was like playing hooky. We could also integrate with the local community, enjoy its conviviality and friendliness, and in a pub experience a curiously comforting sensation when the barman would say on our arrival, "It'll be the usual then?" It was fun, but it wasn't an unbridled bundle of laughs, for it gradually dawned on us that there were 3 of us in this relationship: Susie, myself and Poignancy. I could never return to Brighton to revisit the Theatre Royal or the Dome after a wonderful evening, or go back to glorious Goodwood. I would periodically imagine myself facing an accusing finger and a painful question. "Are you doing the right thing, pal?" But every time the question was posed, I always answered yes. Poignancy was simply the price I had to pay for feeling so good. And whenever it popped its head round the door, I knew it was really saying, "Hang in there, folks. Keep having a ball." As our year in Brighton neared its end, with another midsummer rushing towards us, we began to experience a new phenomenon. The first and last times that had been the dominating feature of our lives were increasingly replaced with last times. The last walk on the lawns at Hove, the last look at Courtney Gate, the last drink in Barney's, the last donation to the big issue guy at the station, who always called me Sean, the last photograph, and then the last day. What a jerk I was, kidding myself I could handle Poignancy. Despite being up north again, I'm still looking better than ever. The mirror no longer cracks when I look at it. But to keep in shape, to keep repetition firmly at bay, we're consulting the Atlas. And the question on our lips is, where next? One can't combine an extended stay and a ready supply of once-onlys in Frome, delightful as I'm sure it is. We have to go somewhere bigger and perhaps abroad. Paris appeals because I would like to see the Mona Lisa before glaucoma kicks in. But wherever we go, we can't replicate the Brighton approach. That would be doing the same thing twice. We need to find a new slant. We need to throw away the crayons. I'm looking at an A to Z. I look at the streets. I think I know what to do.
Ghost Town by Jessica Paczynski. This morning was one of those mornings where everything is clicking. Through a glorious combination of waking up early enough and a toddler who slept a little longer than usual, I was able to work out, shower, and have her breakfast made before I retrieved her from the crib. We planned to visit my grandmother in a rehab facility where she's been recovering from a stroke. But since things were going my way and the sun was shining, I decided we'd leave early and take a detour to the beach in Edmonds, Washington. It's an Edmonds kind of day, I thought. Edmonds is a sweet little town, nestled into the beaches and hills on and above Puget Sound north of Seattle. It has a main street with cute shops, a ferry dock, and train tracks running right along the water. It's an Edmonds kind of day is an ad slogan from the 80s and 90s, and many longtime residents still proudly display it on bumper stickers and faded, coffee-stained mugs. And in addition to all it has going for it, this charming little town holds so much of my history. My grandmother grew up there, and her father worked as a baker downtown at the Edmonds Bakery. She and my grandpa settled there after raising their 6 children, first in a giant house on Vista Way, and then in a condo with a panoramic view of the Sound, the Olympic Mountains, the ferry, and the trains. When they weren't snowbirding in Arizona, they lived out their days together to the rhythm of foghorns and train whistles. Her sister, a widow, lived just a mile or so away until she passed in 2010. My grandfather died 4 years later, in his living room, surrounded by his wife, his children, and me, while the trains and ferries kept up their schedules outside. As my grandma recovers, their condo sits empty, but spring is in full bloom all around it. Driving into town today, I passed the Chinese restaurant where all 20-plus of us used to crowd into the back room, stuffing ourselves with pot stickers and chow mein, and my cousins and I would order Shirley Temples with like 9 cherries. I passed the ice cream shop my grandma would take us to and the park where we held her 60th birthday party 26 years ago. I passed the churches where funerals were held for both of my grandfathers and the house my uncle lived in until last year, where we spent the 4th of July with the best view of the fireworks in town for so many summers. I smiled at the brewery my grandpa would take us to so we could make root beer every Christmas. I passed the library where my cousin got married and the hospital where I was born. I can't turn a corner in that town without a memory of someone or everyone I love. And for a few aching moments today, it felt unfamiliar and sad. The backdrop of so many of my sweetest days so far felt like a ghost town, empty of all of the people who made those days so precious. For a second, I wanted to turn around. I didn't want to face this place that wasn't the same anymore, because that would mean that I'm not the same anymore, and I'd have to admit those sweet days are over. But I glanced in my rearview at my tiny passenger. I'd promised her a beach today, after all. And suddenly, like so many things do, this place so sacred to me became fresh again through her eyes. It wasn't sad, and it wasn't empty of people I love. The person I love most in the world was standing right next to me, full of life and joy and exclamations of "boat!" and "choo-choo!" And just like that, I made a brand new memory in Edmonds. We left the beach and visited my grandma. My mom met us there, and I watched in awe as my tiny girl interacted with them both, and felt the blessing of 4 generations of women still living and breathing in the same room together. As I drove Sadie home, I made peace with my ghost town, somewhere in my soul. The apparitions of my past aren't there to hurt me, or make me feel sad. They're there to comfort me, to make me strong, and remind me of where I come from, and where I'll always belong, where my little girl will always belong too. I hope I never fail to see them. After all, some ghosts are friendly. Literature is everywhere. December 20th, 2014. My nephew saw the monster rise from the water again. Cammy, green and scaly with wings spread wide, rose from the water and crawled up onto the beach. Her eyes glowed yellow in the iris, and her pupils were black and glittered with the memories of eons-old stars. She crawled up on the beach where my nephew sat on a log, and she rose on powerful legs to sit beside him. She did so with surprising grace. My nephew is 3. These things hardly faze him, I'm sure you understand. Cammy spoke with a voice that sounded like warm summer breezes, and lemon custard and some soda water. "Bananas today?" she asked. My nephew glanced up and held out a long orange vegetable. "You have carrot. This one is too big." Cammy smiled, her sharp teeth gleaming in the cold December morning. "Thank you." She took the carrot from him and munched happily. Hello there, welcome to No Extra Words, the Flash Fiction podcast. My name is Chris Baker-Dersch. I'm your producer and editor. I'm annoyed with the dictionary today, not for the first time, but I don't like the dictionary's definition of the word poignancy. Cambridge Dictionary is defining poignancy as causing a feeling of sadness. And as usual, that's true, but that is only partially true. And I think it's because, of course, we have these words in language that there is no other word that quite captures that feeling. And sometimes it's cultural. When you learn a new language, you'll often hear words that just have no translation in English. And it's because the meaning is specifically cultural. Poignancy is sadness, but I think, as Ivan Nurburg points out in his story, we wouldn't do it to ourselves if it was just sadness. I think poignancy is a state of mind that sometimes comes upon us. You heard Jessica Pasinski talking about that in her piece, how it sneaks up on us. But I also think it's sometimes something we choose to lean into because, as she says, ghosts are friendly. It keeps us from forgetting things that are so important to hold dear. It's almost a voluntary sadness, but it's very bittersweet. I think sadness is too strong a word sometimes. And so that's the place we are at today, is that place of remembering, of nostalgia, of a place evoking a very, very strong reaction in us. We started off on the right foot with that, with Ivan Nurburg. Love it when people read in accents. An accent all by itself can evoke a place. Ivan's story is award-winning. It was given an award by The Guardian in the UK, and I think you can totally hear why. And then we translate into Jessica Pasinski's story, and we're hopscotching back and forth between fiction and nonfiction today. Because Ivan Nurburg will freely admit to you, and he said it to me in his bio, that this story is fiction. It was inspired by a novel he was writing, but it's also a distillation of an actual year he spent in Bristol. And then we get to Jessica Pasinski's story, which is nonfiction. It originally appeared on her blog, where she writes vignettes about her own life. And we don't do a lot of nonfiction here, but I saw this piece and asked Jessica if I could use it because it fits so nicely in with what we're doing today. And then we got to our segment. I snuck it in there. You didn't even notice, did you? You didn't even notice that we went to a new segment today, our Literature is Everywhere segment. This story was perfect to follow Jessica's piece because it comes from the same kind of location. And this, I do a lot of found poetry, especially if you follow me on Instagram. You will see that I find things in the world and in nature and on signs and do found poetry. This is found literature. I was staying in a beach cabin, not incredibly far from the place Jessica was talking about, with a friend on a rainy, rainy day in March. And we were reading through the guest book and found this story penned by some anonymous stranger who had been in the beach house before us. And I almost didn't bring it to you because I'm really meticulous about securing permissions on this show because I think that's the way that we're respectful to writers. And there was no earthly way to do this with this piece. And it sent me into a copyright rabbit hole, which I won't give you the details on, but came down to this is considered under U.S. copyright law to be an orphan work, which is a phrase that all by itself evokes so much poetry and so much linguistic juiciness that I love it. And the laws on orphan works are not clear at all. It's very much a legal gray area, and most people would err on the side of not bringing it to you, which I totally understand. But I have decided to try to follow best practices and bring it to you and let the chips fall where they may, because I thought it was a story that I needed to share, my little bit of found literature. So thank you to the anonymous stranger that penned that story. And the interaction of the monster character with the adult narrator, with the innocence of the child, that's a distillation of poignancy in a way that I couldn't imagine doing any other way. And we're going to close today with Dave Barrett, returning contributor to the show, sharing with us an excerpt of his novel. This particular excerpt was originally published in the Vignette Review, and the novel is Gone Alaska. All I want to say about this piece is, without you having heard it yet, I used to work at a library that was over a river, and watching the salmon swim under the library was a tradition of the fall. And I can only imagine what before the library and before the freeway and before everything else, what that river looked like. And I want to thank Dave for bringing it to us. So thank you for joining us on this poignant fiction, nonfiction episode of No Extra Words, the Flash Fiction Podcast. Enjoy whatever places your summer is taking you to. And I hope you walk through them with a little, but not too much poignancy. Red of 10,000 Years by Dave Barrett. My late great Uncle John always said, there are 3 things you don't talk about in a bar: religion, politics, and salmon. Even as far inland as North Idaho, I'd been raised on salmon lore of the great runs before the dams. Before the dams was a catchphrase from a time when Coeur d'Alene lake banks and tributary stream bottoms burned day-glow red and green in the fall. Before Grand Coulee came along, Uncle John used to say, the hearts and veins of these lakes and rivers burned red with the blood and fury of spawning salmon. I'm told it was truly a sight to behold, like Monday Night Football, 4th of July, and an electric light show, all rolled into one. I was 10 years old when I witnessed one of these light shows for myself. I'd been shipped out to spend the summer with some cousins that lived along the Clearwater River near Lewiston. The Clearwater is a tributary of the Snake, and in those days it still hosted one of the largest sockeye runs east of the Cascade Range. For years I'd been hearing stories, how my Uncle Albert harvested the fish with a pitchfork, how my cousins Bill and Ted clobbered the critters with boulders and baseball bats in the shallower pools of the infernal and ungodly stench of their spent and rotting carcasses from Aunt Mabel. All that August, I'd awoke at the crack of dawn to walk down to the river's edge to see if the salmon had moved in during the night. From Uncle Albert, I'd learned that salmon move mostly at night, and I remember lying there in the coffin-like dark and quiet of the country night, thinking I could actually feel the salmon moving into their spawning reds the way you might feel an intruder entering your home. All month this had been my morning ritual, and every morning, as I grumbled my way back from the river to the chicken yard to gather eggs for breakfast, I remember being disappointed by it. Aunt Mabel said she didn't know what was up, but every year the salmon were showing up later and later in the season. Uncle Albert said it was the dams and the fish ladders on the Snake that was slowing them down. Bill and Ted, grinning and patting their baseball bats, said the Slimers had gotten wind of what was coming their way. Then, on Labor Day weekend, the morning before the day I was to return home, it happened. I remember it was a strangely overcast morning, clouds hanging so low I couldn't see the mountains in the distance. Thunder and lightning had rippled through the bedroom window all night long. I remember tiptoeing through the house, carrying my boots, and not putting them on until I was out of the back stoop past the kitchen door. The last thing I wanted, if I should be so lucky as to see these salmon, was Bill and Ted standing beside me pelting the fish with rocks. I had to climb down a mess of boulders to get a view of the river bottom. I remember the reflection of the red leaves from the sumac bushes along the opposite bank seeming more marked than usual. 12 times I'd mistaken the shimmering of these sumac leaves for schools of sockeye. Then, reaching the big granite boulder that I had singled out as my observation deck, I saw it. Beneath the red of these sumacs was another red, a deeper red, the red Uncle John had spoken of, the red of my dreams and streamside visions, red of 10,000 years. Up and down, one side to the other, far as the eye could see. Salmon. Thanks for listening to the No Extra Words podcast. For more information about today's stories and contributors, or to learn how to submit your own work, please visit us at noextrawords.wordpress.com. If you would like to support the show, please tell a few friends about us, or you can visit patreon.com/noextrawords to pledge your financial support. See you next time.